When you implement no contact with an avoidant partner, they typically expect your silence to be temporary, a brief emotional reaction that will fade once you've processed your hurt feelings and become available for their eventual return. However, when your no contact extends far beyond their anticipated timeline, avoidants experience escalating stages of panic that systematically dismantle their psychological defenses and force them to confront the reality that they may have permanently lost access to your love and support. Understanding these 5 stages reveals how their attachment system responds to genuine threat of abandonment and why extended no contact becomes their psychological nightmare. Stage 1. Confident indifference and timeline assumptions. Weeks 1 to 8. During the initial phase of your no contact, avoidants typically experience what can only be described as confident indifference, operating under the assumption that your silence represents temporary emotional overwhelm that will naturally resolve within a predictable time frame. This stage is characterized by their complete lack of concern about your absence and their certainty that you'll eventually reach out once you've processed your feelings about the relationship ending. Their confidence stems from past experiences where partners who implemented no contact eventually broke their silence to seek closure, express their feelings, or attempt reconciliation. They've learned to expect that people who loved them deeply cannot maintain permanent distance, especially when the separation wasn't their choice. This historical pattern creates psychological certainty that your current silence is simply another temporary withdrawal that will end when your emotional needs overcome your resolve. During this stage, they often experience relief rather than anxiety about your absence, the pressure of managing your emotional needs, responding to relationship expectations, and navigating the guilt they felt about their emotional unavailability suddenly disappears, creating a sense of freedom and validation that their decision to end the relationship was correct. They may even feel grateful that you're giving them space without drama or pursuit. Their daily routines typically remain unchanged during this period, as they don't yet perceive your absence as a loss requiring adjustment. They continue with work, social activities, and personal pursuits, while occasionally noting your silence with mild curiosity rather than concern. If they think about you at all, it's usually with the assumption that you're probably struggling with the separation while they're thriving in their independence. The timeline they unconsciously establish for your eventual contact typically ranges from a few days to perhaps 6 weeks, based on their experience with previous partners and their assumption about your emotional dependency. They expect that your need for closure, validation, or connection will eventually override your commitment to no contact, particularly during holidays, anniversaries, or stressful periods when you might seek their emotional support. Their social media activity during this stage often reflects their confidence and relief, with posts about independence, personal achievements, or activities that demonstrate they're moving forward without apparent difficulty. They may even hope you're monitoring their online presence and will eventually feel compelled to reach out in response to their apparent happiness and success. Most importantly, their psychological defenses remain fully intact during this stage because they don't perceive any genuine threat to their emotional security. Your absence feels manageable because they assume it's temporary, allowing them to maintain their usual emotional detachment while expecting your eventual return to the familiar dynamic where you pursue while they control the level of connection. The confidence they experience during this stage often reinforces their belief that they don't need romantic relationships for their emotional well-being, and that their decision to prioritize independence over partnership was wise and mature. This self-validation makes the eventual stages of panic even more psychologically devastating when their assumptions prove incorrect. Stage 2. Mild concern and reality testing. Weeks 8 to 16. As your no contact extends beyond their expected timeline, Avoidants begin to experience the first cracks in their confident indifference as mild concern creeps into their consciousness. This stage is characterized by increased attention to your silence and subtle attempts to test whether your no contact is as absolute as it appears, though they still maintain hope that your withdrawal is temporary rather than permanent. The transition into this stage typically occurs when they realize that significant time has passed without any attempt at contact from you, forcing them to acknowledge that your silence might be more serious than they initially assumed. They begin to wonder whether you're truly committed to permanent separation, or whether you're simply taking longer than expected to process your feelings about the relationship ending. Their mild concern manifests as increased monitoring of your online activity and social media presence as they search for signs of your emotional state and potential availability for future contact. They may check your profiles more frequently, analyze your posts for hidden meanings about your feelings toward them, or look for evidence that you're struggling with the separation and might eventually reach out. During this stage, they often begin subtle reality testing behaviors designed to gauge your commitment to no contact without appearing to violate your boundaries or compromise their own dignity. This might include casual social media activity that they hope will capture your attention, indirect contact through mutual friends, or strategic appearances at places where they might encounter you accidentally. Their daily routines begin to include more frequent thoughts about your absence, though they typically rationalize these thoughts as curiosity rather than genuine concern. They may find themselves wondering how you're handling the separation, whether you're dating other people, or what you think about their own apparent adjustment to single life. The mild concern they experience often includes questioning whether they accurately assessed your emotional investment in the relationship and your capacity for extended separation. They begin to wonder whether they underestimated your strength or overestimated your emotional dependency, creating the first doubts about their assumptions regarding your attachment to them. Their social circle may notice subtle changes in their behavior during this stage as they become more interested in conversations about relationships, breakups, or mutual friends who might have information about your well-being. They may ask casual questions about your activities or emotional state, while maintaining the pretense that they're simply curious rather than concerned. Sleep and concentration patterns may begin to show minor disruptions during this stage, as their unconscious mind processes the possibility that your absence might be more permanent than anticipated. However, these changes are typically subtle enough that they can attribute them to work stress, seasonal changes, or other external factors rather than acknowledging concern about your continued silence. The reality testing they engage in often backfires by providing evidence that you're genuinely moving forward with your life rather than waiting for their return. Seeing you engaged in new activities, spending time with friends, or appearing happy in social media posts challenges their assumption that you're struggling with the separation and secretly hoping for reconciliation. Most significantly, this stage marks the beginning of their recognition that their usual timeline expectations may be incorrect and that your no contact might represent a more serious commitment to separation than they've previously encountered. This recognition plants the first seeds of anxiety that will grow into full panic in subsequent stages. Stage 3, growing anxiety and control. Loss recognition, weeks 16 to 32. The third stage represents a significant escalation in the avoidant's psychological distress as they begin to recognize that they may have fundamentally misjudged your commitment to no contact and that their usual sense of control over relationship dynamics has been completely eliminated. This stage is characterized by growing anxiety about the permanence of your absence and the first genuine panic about potentially losing you forever. The transition into this stage typically occurs when they realize that your no contact has extended far beyond any timeline they considered possible, forcing them to confront that their assumptions about your emotional dependency and eventual return were completely incorrect. This recognition shatters their confidence and creates the first real fear that they may have permanently lost access to your love and support. Their growing anxiety manifests in increased preoccupation with your absence and obsessive analysis of what your extended silence might mean for their future. They begin to seriously consider the possibility that you've moved on completely and that their window for eventual reconciliation may be closing or already closed. The recognition of control loss becomes particularly devastating because it challenges their fundamental approach to relationships and their belief in their ability to manage romantic dynamics according to their comfort level. Throughout your relationship, they maintain psychological security through their ability to control the level of intimacy and their confidence that you would remain available regardless of their emotional limitations. During this stage, their reality testing behaviors often escalate as they desperately seek information about your emotional state and potential availability for future contact. They may increase their social media monitoring, make more frequent inquiries to mutual friends, or even consider direct contact while maintaining plausible deniability about their true motivations. Physical symptoms of anxiety often emerge during this stage as their nervous system responds to the genuine threat of permanent abandonment. They may experience sleep disturbances, appetite changes, concentration difficulties, or general restlessness that they cannot easily attribute to other life circumstances. Their social behavior typically changes as they become less emotionally available to friends and more preoccupied with thoughts about your relationship and its ending. Friends may notice increased moodiness, distraction, or subtle changes in their personality that reflect their growing internal anxiety about your continued absence. The anxiety they experience often includes detailed analysis of their own behavior during the relationship as they search for explanations about what might have motivated your commitment to such extended no contact. This self-reflection, while potentially valuable, is typically motivated by their desire to understand how to regain access to you, rather than genuine personal growth. Their assumptions about their own emotional independence begin to crumble during this stage, as they confront evidence that your absence has created genuine distress and preoccupation that contradicts their self-image as someone who doesn't need others for emotional well-being. This contradiction between their self-concept and their current experience creates additional psychological pressure. Most importantly, this stage marks the beginning of genuine attachment panic as they start to comprehend that they may have lost something irreplaceable through their own emotional limitations and relationship patterns. The possibility that their avoidant behavior costs them access to genuine love and support creates existential anxiety about their approach to relationships and their capacity for emotional connection. The growing anxiety often includes recognition that they may need to take active steps to restore contact if they want to prevent permanent loss, but their pride and fear of rejection create internal conflict about whether to abandon their dignity to pursue someone they assumed would always remain available for their eventual return. Stage 4. Desperate information. Seeking and emotional unraveling. Weeks 32 to 52. Stage 4 represents a critical escalation where the avoidant's growing anxiety transforms into desperate panic as they frantically seek information about your life and emotional state, while their carefully constructed psychological defenses begin to completely unravel. This stage is characterized by obsessive behavior that contradicts their usual emotional distance and increasingly desperate attempts to understand whether any possibility for reconnection still exists. The desperation they experience stems from their recognition that your extended no contact likely indicates you've moved beyond hoping for their return and may have genuinely detached from the relationship emotionally and practically. This realization triggers their deepest abandonment fears and forces them to confront that their usual strategy of maintaining control through emotional distance has completely backfired. Their information seeking becomes increasingly compulsive and invasive as they exhaust normal channels for learning about your well-being and emotional state. They may create fake social media accounts to monitor your activity, pump mutual friends for detailed information about your life, or even consider hiring private investigators or other extreme measures to gather intelligence about your circumstances. The emotional unraveling that characterizes this stage manifests as the breakdown of their usual emotional regulation system and the emergence of feelings they've spent their lives suppressing. They may experience intense loneliness, profound regret, desperate longing, and attachment panic that feels completely foreign and overwhelming to their psychological system. Sleep disturbances often become severe during this stage as their mind races with thoughts about what you're doing, whether you think about them and what their life might look like if they never regain access to your love and support. They may experience insomnia, nightmares, or other sleep disruptions that affect their overall functioning and mental health. Their professional performance typically suffers during this stage as their preoccupation with your absence interferes with their ability to concentrate on work responsibilities. Colleagues may notice decreased productivity, increased distraction, or changes in their usual professional demeanor that reflect their internal emotional chaos. The desperation often includes detailed fantasy scenarios about potential reunion that provide temporary psychological relief while maintaining their attachment to hope for eventual reconciliation. They may spend hours imagining what they would say if they encountered you, how they would explain their behavior, or what changes they would promise to secure another chance. Their social relationships often deteriorate during this stage as they become increasingly difficult to be around due to their moodiness, preoccupation, and emotional volatility. Friends may notice that they're no longer present during social activities and seem constantly distracted by thoughts about something they won't discuss openly. Physical health consequences often emerge as the chronic stress of their emotional unraveling affects their immune system, cardiovascular health, and overall physical well-being. They may develop stress-related illnesses, experience changes in appetite and weight, or notice other physical symptoms of psychological distress. The information they desperately seek often provides evidence that contradicts their hopes for eventual reconciliation, as they learn that you're building a fulfilling life that doesn't include them and may be dating other people or achieving personal goals that demonstrate your independence from the relationship. Most devastatingly, this stage often includes their first genuine recognition that they may have made a catastrophic mistake by taking your love for granted, and that their emotional limitations may have cost them the best relationship they were capable of having. This recognition creates profound regret and self-anger that compounds their existing anxiety and desperation. Their attempts to rationalize or minimize their distress become increasingly ineffective as the evidence of their attachment to you becomes undeniable through their obsessive behavior and emotional reactions. They can no longer maintain the illusion that they don't need romantic connection or that your absence doesn't affect their well-being. Stage 5, complete psychological breakdown and desperate action, week 52 plus. The final stage represents total psychological collapse as the avoidance attachment system reaches critical failure, and they abandon all pretense of emotional independence or dignity in desperate attempts to restore contact with you. This stage is characterized by behavior that completely contradicts their usual personality and represents the complete breakdown of their psychological defenses against attachment and vulnerability. The psychological breakdown that defines this stage occurs when they finally accept that your no contact is permanent and that they've lost access to your love forever, triggering attachment panic so severe that it overwhelms every coping mechanism they've developed throughout their lives. This realization creates existential crisis about their worth, their capacity for love, and their future prospects for emotional connection. Their desperate actions during this stage often include complete abandonment of pride and dignity, as they engage in behaviors they would have previously considered humiliating or pathetic. They may send lengthy emails detailing their feelings, leave voicemails expressing regret and desperation, or show up at your home or workplace in violation of your clearly established boundaries. The desperation they experience often motivates grand gesture attempts designed to capture your attention and demonstrate the depth of their feelings. These gestures typically exceed anything they provided during the actual relationship and represent their attempt to prove that losing you has fundamentally changed their capacity for emotional expression and romantic effort. Their communication attempts often include detailed promises of change, commitments to therapy or personal growth work, and elaborate explanations of how losing you has helped them understand their own emotional limitations and the value of what they destroyed. However, these promises are typically motivated by panic rather than genuine readiness for sustained personal development. The psychological breakdown often includes complete disruption of their usual life patterns as they become unable to focus on work, maintain social relationships, or engage in activities that previously provided satisfaction and distraction. Their entire existence becomes focused on the possibility of regaining access to you. Physical symptoms reach crisis levels during this stage as the chronic stress and emotional overwhelm manifest in serious health consequences, including severe insomnia, dramatic weight loss or gain, cardiovascular problems, or other stress-related medical conditions that require professional intervention. Their social support systems often collapse during this stage as friends and family become exhausted by their emotional volatility and obsessive focus on the relationship ending. They may alienate the people who could provide emotional support by becoming impossible to be around, or by constantly redirecting every conversation back to their regret about losing you. The desperate actions they take often include boundary violations that feel stalking-like, despite their genuine belief that they're simply trying to save the relationship. They may monitor your activities, contact your friends or family members, or engage in behaviors that make you feel unsafe or harassed. Financial consequences often emerge as they make impulsive decisions motivated by their desperate desire to regain your attention. They may quit jobs that interfere with their pursuit efforts, spend money they can't afford on grand gestures, or make other financially destructive choices driven by their emotional crisis. Most tragically, this stage often includes recognition that their desperate efforts are actually pushing you further away and confirming your decision to maintain no contact. This recognition that their own behavior is preventing the reconnection they desperately want creates additional psychological torment and self-hatred. The complete breakdown they experience often forces them to confront fundamental questions about their identity, their capacity for love, and their approach to relationships that they've avoided their entire lives. This forced self-examination can be psychologically devastating, but also creates potential for genuine personal growth if they receive appropriate support. Their desperate actions during this stage typically represent their last attempt to restore the relationship before accepting permanent loss. When these efforts fail, they often enter a period of profound depression and grief as they finally accept that their emotional limitations have cost them something irreplaceable. The psychological mechanics. Why extended no contact destroys them. Understanding why extended no contact creates such devastating psychological effects on avoidants requires examining the specific mechanisms that make your sustained absence their worst nightmare, and why it systematically dismantles every defense they've built against attachment and vulnerability. The primary mechanism involves the complete elimination of their sense of control over relationship dynamics, which serves as the foundation for their emotional security. Avoidants typically maintain psychological equilibrium through their ability to control the level of intimacy, determine when and how much connection occurs, and maintain confidence that their partners will remain available regardless of their emotional limitations. Your extended no contact eliminates this control entirely and forces them to confront their genuine powerlessness over your feelings, choices, and availability. This powerlessness feels existentially threatening because it contradicts their fundamental approach to emotional safety and forces them to experience the vulnerability they've spent their lives avoiding. The sustained nature of your absence also prevents them from using their usual coping mechanisms of distraction, rationalization, and emotional suppression. While they can temporarily ignore short-term relationship problems or partner dissatisfaction, extended no contact creates chronic psychological pressure that eventually overwhelms their defensive capabilities. The timeline factor works against their psychological patterns because avoidants typically expect relationship problems to resolve naturally through time and distance rather than requiring active effort or change on their part. Your sustained absence indicates that time alone won't repair the damage they've caused, and that your commitment to separation isn't wavering as they expected. Most crucially, extended no contact forces them to confront their genuine attachment to you without the buffer of ongoing connection that allows them to minimize or deny their emotional investment. When they can no longer monitor your emotional state or maintain any form of contact, they're left alone with their feelings about losing you, often discovering emotional investment they never acknowledged. The extended timeline also provides evidence that you've likely moved through your own healing process and may have genuinely detached from the relationship, making their eventual return attempts feel futile rather than hopeful. This recognition that they may have missed their window for reconciliation creates additional panic about permanent loss. Your extended no contact ultimately becomes their psychological nightmare because it represents everything their attachment system is designed to avoid: complete loss of control, sustained vulnerability, genuine threat of abandonment, and forced confrontation with their own emotional needs and limitations. The longer your silence continues, the more completely it dismantles their psychological defenses and forces them to experience the attachment panic they've structured their entire life to avoid.